Welcome to the 44th Annual Old Dominion University Literary Festival. Our theme this year, Afterwards, highlights work that addresses the storms of past and present and the changes wrought upon us as we turn to face the future. I'm Kent Wascom, co-director of the festival, along with my colleague Katherine Jackson, and we'd like to thank you all for being here for tonight's reading by author and 2021 National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree, Dontiel W. Moniz, sponsored by the ODU Department of Women's Studies. Following the reading, we will have time for audience members to ask questions. So if you're watching, please feel free to leave your questions for the Q&A portion of the event in the comments. It is now my honor to welcome to the stage, as it were, to introduce our featured author, Dr. Jennifer Fish.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Department of Women's Studies, it's our great honor to welcome to tonight's Literary Festival author Dontiel W. Moniz. And her work, just released this year in February, Milk, Blood, and Heat, has already earned 13 prominent national recognitions, including Time Magazine, O, the Oprah Magazine, and Elle. This work also became the inaugural Roxane Gay Audacious Book Club pick. As a creative writer, Dontiel has earned a MacDowell Fellowship as well as the Alice Hoffman Prize for Fiction. Her writing has also appeared in the Paris Review, Harper's Bazaar, Plowshares, and the Yale Review, just to name a few. As I was going through the reviews of this incredible new work, I found a particular complementary dialectic, and her work and book of short stories is described as both comforting and piercing, spectacular and dangerous, rigorous and complex, unpredictable and earned, and a seething excavation of want and human error. Dontiel's work takes us from Florida, where she focuses on stories of women and the body and sexuality and place and intergenerational trauma in particular. And she is now speaking to us from the Midwest, where she serves as an assistant professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dontiel W. Moniz, we're so grateful to have you here this evening. Welcome to ODU Virtually, and we so look forward to hearing about your work.
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. As someone who has wanted to be a writer for a very long time and had no idea what it looked like to go from, writing for yourself versus writing for an audience, it's really cool to me still. It trips me out that anybody wants to read my work and hear me talk about my work. So that's really cool. So thank you for that. I was thinking a lot about what I might read tonight in terms of the theme of this festival afterwards, and, thinking about rebirth and survival and recreation of the self. And I think that all of my stories are wrestling with that in some way or another. Each character comes to a point where they have to decide, basically, if they choose to change how they've been living, and what are the consequences of that change or that inaction. So all the stories do that, but I think one in particular really had me thinking about rebirth. So I'm going to read the story Feast. There is only moonlight, a spill of it across Heath's shoulders, illuminating how he lies on his side, turned from me, and also the pair of minuscule hands floating above the curtain rod, the fingers small as the tines of a doll's silver fork. When I call my husband's name, my voice splinters from my throat, and Heath wakes immediately, turns on the bedside lamp, leans in so close I can smell the sleep on his breath. He checks my pupils, then lays the cool back of his hand against my forehead. Do you have any pain? He asks, and I want to swallow my mouth, to fold in my lips and chew until they burst, to keep myself from laughing. I place my hands on my stomach and nod. Heath reaches underneath my sleep shirt to test the tenderness of my skin. What hurts? His fingers keep pressing, like I'm clay. Everything, I say. He looks at me then, and in the look I can see him envisioning how I will be at some point in the future, 10 years from now or 20. I am a vague imprint of the girl he thought I was when we married, my mouth a black cave, ugly and squared. Raina, you're fine, Heath says. Everything's okay. It was a nightmare. He turns the light back out, and I don't correct him. Don't mention the tiny hands that are still climbing up and down the drapes. We are both pretending. It's the only way we sleep. This thing with the body parts makes sense to me, this fixation with scale. I blame all those baby tracker apps for that, measuring the growth of my child as compared to produce, kumquats and Brussels sprouts, pomegranate seeds, green lentils, except instead of roots, it was growing a brain and tongue, eyebrows, a thumb to suck. Briefly, I'd been in love with it. Keith and I had been married for 3 years, and he had this whole other child, this ex wife, a past life that had nothing to do with me. I had my friends' questions, when y'all having kids of your own, and my mother's proclamations, that baby's gonna have good hair. I had two hands held out, waiting to receive my due. I'd wanted a honeymoon baby, a curly haired kid with golden skin and Heath's hazel eyes. While I waited, I would practice with his child. Out together at dinner, I'd wind a strand of Neela's hair behind her ear, tell her not to eat so fast, introduce her as our daughter. 9 months ago, when I missed my period, when I confirmed with the pee stick and the doctor, when I told Heath over a bottle of expensive champagne and a card that read Daddy, I was glowing from the inside out. This baby validated me in the same way as my master's degree, my good credit, Heath's getting down on one knee. I bought the baby books, browsed the best cribs, shunned the million things expectant mothers should shun. Rule by rule, I was everything I was supposed to be, twice as good, for half as much. The baby was the size of a Washington cherry, with miniature sex organs even a skilled technician couldn't see when I lost it. There'd been no symptoms. It was too small for fluttering. And when I went to the appointment, the milestone when embryo became fetus, the doctor told me she was sorry, her face solemn in practice. There was no heartbeat. It was, and then it wasn't. This is common in early pregnancy, she told me. It happens all the time. Once the fetus is out and you begin ovulating, you can try again. The fetus, she'd said, and the word I'd been so excited about minutes earlier soured. I opted out of the D&C and the pill, waiting for things to proceed naturally. There was still hope inside of me. Doctors were wrong all the time. I prodded my slim belly, shook it, willing my baby to move. Wake up, baby, I commanded. But the next day, the bleeding started and didn't stop. The doctor said, it's beginning, and there was nothing to do. Heath kissed my forehead, tried to fold me into his arms, but I couldn't let him hold me. I locked myself in the bathroom with the baby books, flipping through them carefully, and nowhere was it written how to reverse time or spark a heartbeat, how to make a womb worthy. I tore the pages out in handfuls and flushed them down the toilet, watched as they swirled back up in soggy clumps and came back to rest at my feet. Later, in the shower, my baby would come out that way too. I saw the first baby part in a bouquet of marigolds Heath brought home that night, the small slit of sex resting among the petals, a girl. I was afraid to blink in case it disappeared. She was with me, talking to me, which meant maybe I could talk back. I was glad to see her, even in this way. If a tiny ear appeared, I'd whisper into it how much she'd been wanted. But over time, these signs began to feel less like benedictions and more like blame. I didn't tell Heath. This was for me, and I didn't need a psychiatrist to understand what these visions were, a reminder of how the baby would have developed if she were still safe inside of me. The moon has been replaced by the buttery glow of mid-afternoon sun when I'm woken by my phone ringing. I know without looking it'll be my mother or Heath, but now no one else bothers to call. Hello. You're still in bed, Heath says. Not a question. Yes. The college has been kind, allowing me to stretch the interpretation of sick leave these last few months, as long as the job gets done. I'd cover my bases diligently, all accounts manned, no client left untended. Mostly I work from home, running formulaic programs that allow financial aid to go through so students can buy their textbooks and birth control, stock their shelves with top ramen. But Heath knows my primary post is my bed, my real work, the practice of forgetting through sleep. You have to pick Neela up from school today. I bring my free hand to my face and examine the fingers, the pinkish white of my nails, the frayed cuticles holding them in place. I bring them to my mouth and bite away the excess skin. Are you there? Heath asks, and I hear an edge of worry in his voice, expertly mixed with a dash of irritation, our most common cocktail these days. Yes, I say, still gnawing. My stomach rumbles. Raina, you promised you would spend the day with her. He pauses, and the space between us hisses with static, his wishes and mine distorted through the phone lines. Please, Heath says, and I sigh. Now that I'm pitiful, I'm a sucker for beggars. I'm getting up, I tell him. I work up a spit in my mouth. swallow the torn off skin. I park on the street outside the circle of mothers and fathers corralled along the drive marked for child pickup. The children are hazy with movement, erratic bits of color sprinting from the school, waving papers, some carrying retro plastic lunchboxes, the kind I used to beg my mother for. Everything always comes back. The children screech like seabirds and collide with their parents with the same energy as waves meeting the shore. I shield my eyes and search for Neela in the crowd. I see her among all the others at the edge of the curb, her tongue poked out in concentration, looking for me. At the sight of her, a pang starts up in my stomach, a kind of knocking, some feeling asking to be acknowledged. My hand is on the keys in a gas tank marked full. It would be easy to drive away before I'm spotted. I could vanish, follow the wet summery air down an unfamiliar highway, and try to escape the little legs dancing on my kitchen counter or the lungs the size of kidney beans wheezing from the nightstand. I imagine cracked earth, giant saguaro, the hot air drying the farther west I ride, and the sun sinking red. Out there, I would track vipers through the bleached sand and lie beneath the moon's cool regard, my belly full and swaying with meat. The coyotes would sing my lullaby. I pull the key from the ignition and get out of the car, cross the street, and hold my hand high. I wave. It's been almost 5 weeks since I've seen her, and I'd forgotten her 6-year-old exuberance, the brightness of her hair, that she loves me. She throws her arms around my waist, and her stomach, soft and plump, pushes against me. I hold her away from my body at the shoulders, look into her face, and feel nothing but appetite. Let's get some food, I say, trying on a smile, a stretched thing. At the car, I buckle Neela into the back seat, and she tells me about Jupiter's moons and clouds of space dust where stars are born. She tells me about gravity, how it keeps us pinned to earth and makes apples fall from trees. We did drawings today, she says, and promises to show me later. I know what I'm supposed to say, but I can't. I am a dead satellite, picking up information, but relaying nothing back. She's a smart kid. She senses this. She tells me she missed me, and because I'm trying, because I love her, I lie. I missed you too, I say, and guide the car onto the road. Heath and the ex-wife have agreed Neela must eat vegetables with every meal, a helping of fresh fruit and whole grains with little allowance for processed junk. I order bacon cheeseburgers and large fries at Wendy's, and we eat them in the parking lot, sharing a chocolate frosty between us, dipping our fries into it, getting brain freeze as the cold saturates our teeth. I let her gulp down my orange soda between sloppy open mouth bites, flick away the bit of hamburger and bread left on the straw like a flea. Our secret, I tell her with a cartoon wink. Can we go to the toy store after? I recognize the hard bargain, the first experiment with parental blackmail, and don't resist. From the early childhood development books I devoured, I know this type of thing is natural, a sign of normal growth. At the toy store, I give her a quarter, watch her insert it into the crank of a dilapidated gumball machine, and grin as the ball spirals down the chute into her waiting hand. I watch her mouth become a red ruin as she chews, her small, perfect teeth smeared with candy blood. We do Neela's homework at the dining room table. She's still babbling, her mind a constant river, surging forward, changing course. Unlike her father, she requires only modest participation. She tells me that the only place as strange as space is the sea. Heath will be home in an hour, no more than 2, and then I can escape this, crawl into my bed and lie naked beneath the sheets. I scribble gray spirals in the margins of her papers with one of her fat school pencils and imagine myself disappearing. Look, Neela says, fetching a construction paper cube from her backpack, pride glowing in the focused point of her face. The cube is only slightly smushed. I made this. Its 6 sides are different colored papers taped together, and each one bears a face drawn in magic marker and Crayola. Here's Mommy and Daddy and me, she says, rotating it so I can see. His side is the blue of robin's egg, and his eyebrows hover like 2 hyphens above his squiggle hair. He seems surprised to find himself rendered in his daughter's careful hand. There's Maui, her French bulldog with a happy, lolling tongue. I'm there too, depicted on yellow, my mouth a seedless watermelon slice. I could be laughing or screaming. Neela holds the last side out like a gift, and there, on pink, another body part. She's drawn a generic baby's head. There's a halo and bird's wings where a neck should be, and its eyes are closed, as if in peace. I can feel her expectancy, her need for my approval, for me to say thank you or nice work. She's waiting for me to be the mother. I run to the hallway bathroom and vomit into the toilet. I do it again and again until there is only bile, the same cautionary shade as my stick figure face. I can hear Neela outside the door, the fear in her voice as she calls to me and brushes against the knob. Don't come in, I say. I flush the toilet and climb into the tub. I know I should go to her, should comfort her and tell her I'm fine, but I can't see her right now. I'm tired of smiling when Heath sighs with the doctors, says we can try again soon as if life is interchangeable, one indistinguishable from another. Right now, I can't pretend that I'm okay or that Neela is mine. There is no make-believe that makes me less horrible, that changes the fact that all day I have wondered why Neela is here, her living, breathing, tangible form, while my baby is not. Heath's home. His deep voice reaches me through the bathroom door, a soothing rumble. In the pauses between, I know Neela is filling him in on our day, directing him to my presence behind the door. He pokes his head in, and when he sees me curled in the tub, his face clouds. I feel bad for him, but not bad enough to explain. How long has she been out here by herself, he asks, and I shrug. Is the house burned down? A muscle tenses in his cheek. We'll talk when I get back, he says, and closes the door behind him. I can hear him pacing, gathering Neela's things before packing her into his car to take her home. When he returns, half an hour later, moving with the heaviness of a much larger man, I'm waiting at the front door, ready for the fight. Did you tell her I was fine before you dropped her off? He closes his eyes, moves past me into the living room. When will you be able to let this go? When can we get back to normal? Let this go? I spark like a star in the night, feeling suddenly full to the brim. I'm glad this is so easy for you. Jesus, Raina, I don't know what to do. It's been 8 months. He grips the bridge of his nose. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying what everyone's told you already. It's common. It happens all the time. It wasn't even... He stops. Looks like he wishes he hadn't come back. We didn't even know what it was. But I knew. Soft petals, shimmering gold, my baby girl, and I wanted my common pain. Maybe you never wanted me to have it, too afraid to tarnish that pure family blood, I jeer, and Heath's face twists. I can feel the thin line I'm towing, about to cross over, but this anger is delicious, satisfying as a last meal, and I can't stop eating of myself. Maybe you're actually happy. After all, you already have your perfect daughter. That's enough, Heath roars. He steps forward and grabs me at the wrists, and if he were a different sort of man, I can see how this might go. But Heath just looks at me like he can't tell who I am, like he wouldn't want to know me. His breath comes hard until the anger softens, and when he lets out a little whimper, a window opens, and through it, for the first time, I can sense his sadness, his jagged need. Stunned, I watch him swallow it. How dare you, he whispers, and I'm ashamed. I lean my forehead against Heath, and he doesn't move away. I'm sorry, I say. I didn't mean it. I'm sorry. I wish I could pin this loss on Neela, on anything, but there's no explanation, no one to blame. I know it's not her fault, or Heath's, maybe not even my own. I kiss Heath until he kisses me back, until we're undressing and he's pressed close against my skin. We've needed this, missed it. There are so many ways to be filled. Please, 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 I beg over and over, like it's the only word I know. I say it the way I did when the baby fell out, warmed by body heat and shower steam, the color of raw life, red globules, liver streaked, clots the size of champagne grapes, and then a slippery silvery sack, small as a coin, my baby in pieces, fig dark and glistening. Before I hunched empty under the shower head, letting the water grow cold, before I slid the sack into a Ziploc, before Heath drove me to the hospital, I picked up my baby and cradled it, tried to see if I could make out a face or a miniature knee in the alien landscape of my insides. I rocked my baby in my hands, told it everything was going to be fine. I knew already what a mother should do. Neela said, the only place as strange as space is the sea. So the next morning, I drive to the city aquarium and buy a ticket. The halls shimmer, filled with a dense amphibious silence. Here it's safe to wander, to be driftless. I pretend to goggle at the flitting of fluorescent fish, to be consumed with nothing more than the wavering of sea kelp stretching up toward artificial light. At the tide pools, I trail my finger along an urchin's purple spines and watch it shudder. blindly grasping until I still my finger in the middle of it, let it hold me. Suddenly, the aquarium is teeming with children, a first grade field trip. The kids rush in, trailed by frazzled teachers, their eyes wide and hands reaching, grasping as the urchin. At once, I want to hold them, press their small chests against mine and feel that vital thump. The children awe at the boneless creatures resting at the bottom of the shallow tank, and their joy is simple, tactile, too much. Feeling unworthy of them, I fade away to seek out darker, more solitary spaces. In a dim room where the water seems heaviest, I rest my head against the glass. For a moment, I can almost remember what it is to be unborn, this darkness, this weight, a comfort. Then something stirs in the water, stealing my attention. In the corner of the tank, hidden by living rock, rests an octopus, iridescent orange with blue rings spiraling up the trunk of its body. Slowly, golden eye unblinking, it feeds a tentacle into the black of its mouth. Its other arms wave, two or three of them shortened, partially eaten already. I can feel its stolid regard, and like the body parts, I know this is meant for me, a synchronicity, something about ashes and rebirth, Ouroboros eating his own tail. Hey, a man says next to me, a middle-aged father in glasses towing a child in each hand. He had snuck up while I'd been transfixed. Maybe my engrossment brought him. He gathers the attention of a nearby worker. Something's wrong with this squid. Nosy, ignorant man, he can't even tell the difference. I press closer to the tank and my reflection superimposes over the animal, my eyes a dark glinting on its body. The man is panicking, perceiving madness or danger, some invisible toxic signal radiating across the current. But I know this act is natural, a truth beneath it, muscled and gleaming. I had heard the creature speak. Sometimes you must consume the damaged body, digest it cell by cell to taste the new beginning. I lean in, lips almost to glass, before the onlookers come to gawk, before the workers can interrupt this godly process and look into its eye. Good, I tell the octopus, like that, one bite at a time.
Thank you so much. It was fabulous. I'm making sure my copy is visible and get it in the screen. Dante, I can't thank you enough. It's absolutely gorgeous. And, just to say, I've loved this collection from the second I got an ARC from Grove. And so it's an absolute honor for you to be here. And for everyone out in the audience, by the way, please stick around after the Q&A because we have a very special announcement that will follow. But for right now, please post your questions and I will relay them to our presenter and otherwise we'll just ask my own because I've got a few. Well, all right, as they flock in, I'll start with one. And because so many of our members of our audience are writers and aspiring writers and student writers, and just folks who like putting pens to papers and fingers to keyboards. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your journey to publication for this book and just kind of the process that you went through from going to graduate school and getting this work out there in the world. Here we
Hi,
are.
I'm so sorry, it lost me.
No, not at all. I'm sure that's us on our end. Thank you for coming back.
So you were saying the process of publication for this book.
Yeah, your journey to that point. If you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I feel like it took a long time. The publication process, the writing process takes a long time. When you think about, oh, I'm going to be a writer, I wrote this story, you think, before you get the experience of knowing like what revision is and what that process looks like, you think like, that's it, that's done. That's fine. It's easy. But like, the work takes a long time. And I think it takes a long time or at least it took a long time for me to get to that point of writer and wrestling with what that meant versus an author, which is an entirely different thing, right? The writing thing is like the more private, internal facing, and then the author portion is the public facing thing. And so the process of getting this book published for me looked like I was really fortunate to attend an MFA where they brought in people to come and speak to us. So I ended up meeting my agent through a campus visit, which was really lucky. It, not just because it was like the first agent that I met, but like it was the right agent for me that just ended up working out that way. But so I had signed with my agent, and I had maybe 7, 8 stories by the time I graduated from my MFA. And I was also working on a novel. And the one thing that you'll find out as a writer, if you're working on short stories, is that everybody wants you to have a novel. Like, everybody's like, okay, great. Yeah, the stories, but like, what's going on with the novel? And so, I was working on both at the same time. And ideally, I wanted to go out with the novel first, because just that's the expected thing. That's what people, want to see from you. But I was still writing these stories, and they were coming more quickly to me, more naturally to me. And I was kind of stuck on the novel. And I had this point where I was like, oh no, I'm going to disappoint, my agent by saying like, hey, I think I want to do the stories first. It just makes more sense. But, my agent is somebody who is interested in the lens and the brain behind the work, and not so much, is it a novel, is it short stories? So she was totally on board, and that made me feel good. And so I ended up, writing to the 11 stories that I had. And then we went on submission for it and got picked up by Grove, which is also lucky because Katie Racian is like a bomb.com editor. So yeah, the process felt kind of like super fraught, just because like even when you get an agent, you don't know whether or not you're going to be able to, like, if anyone's going to be interested in your book, especially if it's short stories. So it kind of looked like having faith that I was doing all I could on my end to try to tell the stories I wanted to tell. And then like having the people in my corner who also believed in those stories.
That's fantastic. And what a gift indeed, or how fortunate to have such an advocate for your work, right? Someone who sees the vision and not necessarily just a product.
Yeah, and that's really the other interesting thing about it, is like your work is your work, but like once you go and pursue publication, it does become a product, right? There's a whole group of people who are like, how can we sell this thing? And then so it's like the art, then also the product. But yeah, it's really good to have people early on in your corner who are like, I'm behind you in the art.
Yeah, that's great. Well, speaking of those people behind production, yeah, it was how, because this is first book, and, beyond all the acclaim and everything else, which is wonderful and should be celebrated and shouted from the rooftops, how have you found, I mean, just personally, I'm really excited to hear how you found Grove. If you got to talk smack, let's go for it. But I
and I know because we're Grove family. Grove is amazing. They're an independent publisher, right? So they're not part of the big 5. So, and I think too, like if you come, especially if you come through an MFA and you're just like the big 5, okay, this is how you get a book sold. You know what I mean? And then you think about, an independent, but they are a bigger independent, institution. And so, but the thing that's great about what I have loved anyways about being an independent, it's like, no, yeah, we love the work, and we're not just going to have all your chips on this one book. You know what I mean? Careers are long, hopefully. Your writing career is long. And if it's not the first book, maybe it's the second, maybe it's the third. And basically, if we're interested in your work, we want to do what we can to help you be not just for this book, but setting you up for the next one too, and so on and so forth. So I feel like Grove was entirely, like I was in conversation with, some big 5 editors, and at the end of the day, I just had a gut instinct, like, I think it's this particular editor. And so I feel like that's where I need to go. And it hasn't been wrong since I've been there. Like, it's been such an amazing experience. It really doesn't feel like being in an independent publisher. If you think about like, there's no more, you know what I mean? Like the book was like everywhere. And I'm sure people were like, oh my God, I'm so tired of seeing this book. I was like, you know what I mean? I was like, it's out there. So I love Grove.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it. I figured as much, but it's nice to hear, and maybe for folks out there to hear about the difference between working with an independent publisher, even one who does have considerable resources, but that versus the big, however many are left as it shrinks by the day.
But so here's the other thing, and I'm glad you said that, because that's the thing that I wanted to say too. Like, it might be in somebody's head like, oh, if you get an offer from the big whatever, no brainer, you go over there. It's like a big house. But the other thing you have to consider is, where are you positioned in terms of their authors, right? If it's a big house, they have a lot of authors. And if you aren't their like top 5 or 10 or whoever it is they're promoting, right, the top books, then like you're probably not getting like the kind of attention that, like that you could get at a slightly smaller space, you know what I mean, that actually is like handpicking the authors that they publish every year, instead of just being like, oh, we're publishing a bunch, you know what I mean, and these big titles will kind of like subsidize. But like I know people who were at the big 5 or some big 5 stuffs, and they were like, yeah, it was really hard to like get a hold of my, publicist, for example, or it was really hard to, or like maybe didn't even get a signed publicist, or like when ARCs came out, they only got digital and no paper ones because like they were saving that for their big authors. And it's like,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm being taken care of, and that's not even a consideration that I have to have.
Absolutely. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm so thrilled to hear it. But it's true indeed. Like it is, or in my experience too, it's such a distinction. It's such a difference. And wow, we are getting a bunch of questions. I love it. I'm just gonna work in ascending order. So from Kia, what was the process behind writing the particular story that you read?
Yeah, so this is like one of the few stories, maybe the only story that came to me as a prompt.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so, and not even in school. I had graduated undergrad. This is before my MFA. And somebody that I went to an arts high school, which, it sounds like, oh, you've been preparing to be a writer all your life. But like going to an arts high school wasn't like, this is how you become an author. It was just like, you wrote, here's your degree. Do you know what I mean? But it did prepare me that like, oh, I do want to do this. But so for that story, somebody that I used to go to high school with had posted like a prompt, and it was basically like, someone's sick, there's an octopus, there's a tension of waiting. And those are the 3 elements. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. Let me see what happens. And then this story came out. So I really did take those 3 things and like turned it into like this whole, I don't know how it happened. But it did start with a prompt, and then I let my brain kind of fill in all the rest of what I could do with an octopus, which is also, I think right before that too, I had looked up like a random fact, and it was like whenever an octopus gets hurt, it can regenerate its limbs, right? And sometimes it'll eat the limb further just to speed up the process. And so that was in my mind. And then I saw this prompt, and I was like, ooh, what can I do with that? Because that's like a creepy, really intense detail that I kind of loved. Yeah, so that's how that story came to be. And then through revision, I figured out like what exactly I was trying to say, because this story did not start like that when I prompted. Like usually if you see something really polished and like working, it probably didn't start that way.
That's I was about to say, oh my God. Straight from the prompt to
just like
your instincts were not only good about the publisher, they're good on every level. But that's a wonderful segue to the next question that we have here, which is about your writing process. From Clara is asking, do you start stories or start projects already knowing how you want them to end, or do those endings come to you eventually? Are they processes of discovery, or does the whole lightning bolt hit and stuff?
Yeah, so actually I do start with endings. Usually that endings are the first thing that comes to me. Whatever little idea comes into my mind, and then I'm kind of they don't happen all at once either. So like I'll have an idea, or I'm a nosy person. I think the thing that writers have in common is that we're really observant. And sometimes that makes us very curious or nosy or whatever. So I'm always kind of just like listening to people around me, watching people around me, that kind of thing. So, if something's interesting to me, I'll write it down in my phone. And, that might not be anything on its own. It's usually not. But then like the more ideas I collect, sometimes my brain is doing this thing in the background and I don't know how it works. And I'm okay with not knowing, because it does work, but it'll be connecting like little seeds. And I'm like, oh, I think these 2 things are connected. So I'll put them together. And so usually by the time I understand, like, okay, I kind of got an idea of a story, I know the endings first. I've rarely had to be like, okay, this isn't the right ending. It's usually endings that I know, and then I'm kind of writing my way towards that ending. Is usually how it works for me.
Far out. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's so different than
What's yours?
I'm shoving my little questions aside. There's sometimes a particular scene is striking enough that I write toward the scene. But a lot of times I'm finding my way. As I go. But I plot a lot of like chapter to chapter. Because I'm a novelist. Like the short story is incredibly intimidating to me, and I haven't written one since grad school.
The novel isn't. I don't like. I don't get it. I'm trying, but I'm just like, I don't, it's so big. Like
It's
how do
a,
you hold
you
it all in
know,
your head?
it's like it's track events, right? Like every once in a while you sprint and then everybody shifts back and forth. But let me, before I get too goofy with my junk, well, this is a very good question indeed, and pure advice for an aspiring writer. We can think about at different points in their career, or maybe just something that really meant a lot for you to hear in your experience.
Yeah, I think the thing that I usually tell my students, and what I wish I had been told sooner, was there's no one right way to be a writer. In terms of like what your process looks like, in terms of if you write every day, if you don't write every day, whatever. So if anybody is telling you this is the way you do this point blank, be very suspicious about like what that person's process is. Like you'd be like, oh, okay. And then just make sure you're taking it with a grain of salt, because the thing is that, there's certain writing conventions. There's, definitely precedents for stuff, but like those are just jumping off points for you to figure out what works for you and whatever it is that you're trying to do. The other thing is especially if you're coming in as a writer who is marginalized in any kind of way, you'll hear certain like, oh, these are Black stories, or these are, immigrant stories, or whatever it is. And it's like, what we think of as those types of stories are usually dictated by publishing in the mainstream and what sells and all of that stuff. But there is no one way a Black story looks. Like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? There is no one way an immigrant story looks. So I would say to anybody who's aspiring to write for themselves, is just to kind of remember that the things that you're hearing around you, all that buzzing about what it looks like, what it should be, that's external. Try not to internalize any of that stuff so that you can protect what is unique and individual about what your writing is. And then if you do that, and then you get a good hold on what it is that you're trying to do and your aesthetics, then you can go find your people, and your people can be useful to you. I think that, we hear all the time that writing is a solitary practice. And I think that's true up until a certain point. After a certain point, it definitely takes a village to like make a book happen, whether that's from your first readers to the people who are designing your covers to your editors, that kind of stuff. But I do think sometimes we let in a community of voices before we figured out what we want to do for ourselves. And then we're influenced by those things in a way where it will be hard to kind of discern like, well, what's me and what's something that, I've internalized from somebody else. So like protect that space and figure out what you're trying to do so that a community can be useful to you. So those are the main things that I would say.
That's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Oh, this is a fine one from Bella. I don't know. I'm real curious about the answer here. Which your story that you read was indeed so emotional. That how did you manage to read it without crying or breaking into shaky voice? Which I would also spin in to ask you to talk a bit about how you prepare for reading and like present yourself. And was that something that, because some people like they're kind of born to strut on stage and read their work, and others of us like kind of have to develop that over time.
Okay, so first, the emotional part. Yeah, so it's an intention of my stories, that what I'm trying to do is, okay. So what I come to art for is to be moved, no matter what that looks like. Like that's what I want. That doesn't mean like, oh, I want to be happy all the time, or like I want something to make me. I just want to be moved. I want to feel something. And so my project for myself is, how can I take these two-dimensional words and use them as a medium to transfer, an emotion or a feeling or whatever from me, a stranger to this reader, to, to somebody else who I don't know at all. And I think that for me to do that, I have to have a little bit of distance. You know what I mean? You can't, if you're in an emotional state, in a highly emotional state, like think about like if you're getting an argument with somebody, and it's very emotional, and you're very limited by what you can view and perceive, right? You're like right in front of the person, and that's all you can have time for. But like if somebody is outside of that argument, they're in a calm place where they can observe everything that's going on. And so like for me in the writing and the reading of it, I just am coming from a calm place so that I can like kind of maintain my own equilibrium and then do what I'm supposed to do, which is the reading. I think too, I stutter a lot is the other thing. Like it just happens like when you're reading. And so when I prepare for a reading, I try to like time myself. So first of all, I know how long I'm reading. but I do think that I have a certain rhythm in my reading, and I think that's only because sound is super important to me when I'm constructing stories too. Like I always read my work out loud to myself. So in some part, because I'm always kind of doing that, reading aloud to myself, it's a little bit it helps me when I'm reading to other people because I already know what it sounds like in my head, and if I'm practicing that sound for somebody else, I can make it get where it's supposed to be. I don't know. I don't know why I don't cry. Like I rarely do, like for my own stuff. I feel like I rarely feel like I'm affected by my work, but maybe it's because I'm coming from that cool place. But that's why I get really happy when people are like, "Oh my God, that messed me up." Like I'm sorry
Yeah.
that you messed up. I didn't mean to mess you up, but I am glad that it's working. Yeah.
Does it happen in composition? Do you feel an emotional pull when you're in a scene?
It's so weird. I don't think so. I think like when things are coming to me, they come to me and I'm like, oh, I can see like what this might be. And I don't know. I don't know. I think it comes to me mostly when other people tell me how it hit them. I think
Yeah.
that like when readers email me or whatever and they're like this and I'm like, you know what I mean? It's like that, but like I don't know. I just have like a coolness or a distance. And I think that that's helpful actually because in that way if I can maintain a little bit of distance, I can also stop myself from judging my characters that I create, you know what I mean? And I think actually be able to render them three-dimensionally as people. The stories, the characters in the story are going to judge them, they're going to judge themselves, but like me having my distance allows me not to do it so that I can just make them people on the page, if any of that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. Um, and don't worry, question writers. I'm not skipping you. I'm going to circle back. I'm just letting these questions dovetail together as well as I can. But from Megan, how influential is your personal experience on your stories? And like being able to, whether it's, well, never mind, I'm not going to trespass.
What?
No, I would say whether, because it's so interesting to think of the, coming from approaching the material and like approaching an idea, which like we get excited about our ideas, we get hot about our ideas, right? And but being able to think about your work and your writing from a place of, if not dispassion, then that sense of coolness and removed to where you're able to make those decisions and make those difficult authorial choices, or maybe even allow yourself to make mistakes and then make the choice to change it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, but then looking at this question, our writers' works are informed by our personal experiences inevitably, but how is yours in particular inform, or how does yours particularly inform what you've written here?
Yeah, I think that's kind of always the question. Like people want to ask fiction writers, they're like, how much of it isn't fiction? And like the thing is it is fiction, but all of it is from me and of me, right? Even if it's not in any way kind of related to my own personal experiences, it comes out of my mind in terms of like the things that I'm wondering about. I kind of write because I'm endlessly fascinated in why we as humans do what we do. Why are we the way we are? And kind of what is the evolution of like having a life? What does it mean to live a life, especially one in which so much of it is stigmatized, especially in Western cultures, right? Like there's just things that we think of as good, things that we think of as bad, and we're told these things. We're told these things from our families around us, our friends and peers, from larger systems of power. We're told what's right, what's wrong. But I guess I started getting into a place where I used to tell myself all the time, like, or I asked myself, like, am I a good person? And then I'd have to kind of stop and be like, well, am I a bad person? Because usually I would skew negative when I'm talking about myself. But then I had to stop and I was like, well, what does good or bad mean without the other if we live on a plane of dualities, right? Like they have to be pushing up against one another in order to mean something in the first place. And then I went further and I thought, well, who's defining the words good and bad? And does that change? And where's that power flowing from and flowing to? And so I think um, even if the characters have nothing to do like with my own life or like I do take stuff from around me. I take stuff that I witness. I take stuff that were like, if there's like, so example, there's a story in the book where two cousins are drowning at the beach, and that is something that actually happened to me and my cousin. But instead of taking that event that happened verbatim, which wouldn't be that thrilling to see, it's like two kids almost drowned and then they didn't, you know what I mean? But I was actually interested in the questions surrounding what does it mean to want to save your own life. Do you know what I mean? We're all creatures of survival. Like that's our primary function in a lot of ways. And our mind sometimes doesn't want to go with that, right? But our bodies always do. And what does that mean if you have to make a choice between you or somebody else you love? And like, how can you ever apologize for something like that? You know what I mean? And so, so that's an example of taking something from my real life and then using this fictional world to get at a deeper question, if not answers. Because I think that I really enjoy that short stories leave me with more questions than answers, but usually they're deeper questions that I can kind of figure out, how does that work in my own life, you know? So yeah, so the answer is they're all of me, all of my fictional stories. Some things are things that might have happened to me, but it's not like verbatim. Once you put something on the page, honestly, it becomes a sort of fiction, right? Even if people are writing nonfiction, memory is a kind of fiction. Do you know what I mean? Your memory changes. You have a different recollection of an event than somebody else might. So it's like fiction and life. It's like telling the truth through lying. So, yeah.
No, that's fabulous. And it's such a beautiful way of thinking about using personal experience as inspiration in writing fiction, that for you in the composition process, it's this kind of mirroring the position that you're putting a reader in, which is to be able to connect with a deeper idea and to put yourself in the position of reckoning with a deeper question.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, the reckoning. And I think that's particularly important when the reckoning is uncomfortable. Nobody wants to be uncomfortable. Nobody wants to admit the things that, maybe aren't great about themselves, right? Like it's really hard to do, to look at yourself honestly, which is why so few people like do it. And they do it in a way that, isn't really productive for themselves or the people in their lives. So my project was, okay, this isn't going to be a book that you fly through and you're like, this was a great beach read. But like, what if I asked the reader to come in and actually sit with what's uncomfortable? Like, those are the situations where true growth can actually happen, when you get yourself out of your comfort zone. And so like, that's what I'm asking from the readers when I wrote this. And, some people won't want to do that, but the people that do, I always appreciate.
Oh, certainly so. Well, I think for quite a few of us reading, we appreciate being put in that position, because it's very different than than the kind of writer who's like pinning you to a board, like you're a little butterfly or something. Where it's like, okay, well, you're pinned here, and now I'm plucking all your scales off, and that can be a fulfilling experience sometimes. But it's really different to be taken over the course of 8 pages, 20 pages, 13 pages. Through an experience that forces you, a force might be too negative, too strong a word, but that again, to reckon with your judgments and with your conceptions of yourself and of others. And like, it's such a powerful thing. But before I lose the thread of questions, this is good. This is something I too would love to hear. So Dantil, for you at this moment, the moment, the time in which you were composing the stories for this book, and through that whole process, what works were influential or meaningful, or maybe just got you through it, right? Like if it's just the songs that you popped on while you were going through those page proofs or whatever it might be, movies, books, or anything. And that's from Desiree.
Yeah. While I was writing, so this process, right? So books don't just get written. Like, I mean, I wish for me it was true that I could be like, I wrote this book, it's done now, a couple months. But especially story collections, right? I think for me too, I didn't know I even had a short story collection until I was like 4 or 5 stories in. You know what I mean? And so like the oldest short story in the book, I actually wrote from undergrad. I wrote it in my undergrad class. It did not look like the way it looks now. Okay, like not at all. And then like the newest one I wrote like right before we sold it. But during the time when I graduated from my MFA, and like I had gotten a grant from the Elizabeth George Foundation. So my only job in that moment was like, okay, finish one of these books so you can like have money to live next year. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of like that. And I was reading a lot of Antonia Nelson's Female Trouble. Like, the first story in that book, which I'm blinking on the title right now, but I was just like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. But like for people in Florida, yeah, you know what I mean? So like, and then I was like, okay, cool. She's doing what I want to do. There's also oh my God, How to Breathe Underwater by Julie Oranger. Oh my gosh. Like
Yeah.
lines so good, it's almost like sickening. It's like, you know what I mean? Like every time I read one of her stories, it pumped me up in a way where I was like, okay, I want to do this too. I want to do this too. And so I would read that. And then I was also watching Sharp Objects on HBO, which, you know, is a book. I think the show actually might be better than the book. I think so, but like just the cinematography of that, the girlhood darkness of that, the South was so present. So I was reading a lot of things that basically where I was trying to figure out what I was trying to do, and seeing those works in their different formats. You know, so the film, the TVs, and the two books, both short story collections. That's what I was reading, and I was just, it kind of kept me motivated to be like, okay, this has worked. People will read it, you know, because there were a lot of times where I was unsure, where I was like, I don't know if I write this, am I going to get canceled? And then I kind of was like, well, you know, at the end of the day, if I'm having this question, if I'm wondering about this, I'm not the only one, because that's how that works, right? We always feel so isolated and alone, and then you connect with some art or whatever that you're like, oh yeah, I'm a person in the world, and we're all connected. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Wow. Sharp Objects. They had a killer soundtrack.
Oh my God, so good. I actually have a couple of those songs, and I just like, there's one that has like no words for a really long time, and it's
That's
like,
my writing playlist.
yeah,
With the synthesizer beat? Yeah. Legit. Oh my goodness. Um, another excellent question. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's see. What do you think? This is from Desiree as well. What do you think draws you, or had drawn you, to the short story as opposed to longer forms?
This is a really good question, because I think if you are somebody who has always been a big reader, and maybe you were writing, like that's what I mean when I say I've been a writer for a long time. Like I still have it somewhere. It's so embarrassing. It's like a little book of poems, illustrated poems that I did. And it's like, kittens are great. Kittens are nice. I know a kitten who just likes rice, with a little bowl with like rice on it. You know what I mean? So I've always written. But when I decided, however old I was like, oh, I want to be a writer. I want to, you know, make a book. I didn't think about, oh, would you do a short story collection or a novel? Because no one had ever talked to me about short stories. I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, you know, obviously, if you want to be a writer, you write a novel. The only reason I came to short stories actually was because I had gone to that arts high school, and, you know, we did workshops, and then I did an undergrad, and we did workshops, and we had to read short stories. And that was really where I started falling in love with short stories, was through workshop. I had nobody tell me, like, you know, you can choose to be a short story writer, or you can write novels. And so there's just something about the short story form. Like, you know, there's all this debate about which one's harder, right? Like novelists think short stories are harder. Short story people think novels are harder. And that's where I'm at right now. It's just so much easier for me to like hold the whole story in my head at one point in time. And I'm also because I'm basically building a story from the sentence up. And I'm also a person who, every time I go back into the document, I start at the beginning, and I kind of modulate those sentences as I go. So, you know, you get general advice of don't edit while you write, just get all that, do whatever works for you. That's how that works for me. I go in, and then I go up back to where I am, but that also helps me immerse back into the story. So it's doing double things for me, where I end up producing cleaner drafts because of it. And then I'm, you know, more immersed into the story. But you can't do that with a novel, or you can do it up until a certain point, but you can't start at the top of a, you know, a 60,000 word thing and work your way back through it. So I think for me, I'm still figuring out the novel thing, but for whatever reason, and I don't know what that reason is, I just understand short stories in a way where it's like my brain does that. Yeah. So we'll see with this novel. I'm in draft 2, about 50,000 words in. So we'll see what happens.
Yay.
Close, but we'll see. They might, you know, I might turn it into Katie, and she'd be like, yeah, this isn't a novel. And I'm like, okay,
We're gonna bust this.
tried.
No, I don't think so. I'm gonna scoot one last question in. Oh, good. Never mind. I won't do mine. We've got another from the audience. As a person, this is from a person who writes but never finished. Would short stories be something to try out, since it may be easier to attain, or is it in fact easier?
So here's the thing about short stories versus a novel. I think people have the idea that short stories are the precursors to novels. Like, I had somebody at a literary party once, come up to me and basically be like, oh, I tried to write this novel. And then I realized, oh, I tried to run before I walked. I should have started with short stories. And I was like, well, it's not really that kind of situation. They're actually completely different forms. One is not a precursor to another. They're entirely different forms that require different tools, that require different pacing. So I wouldn't necessarily say that short stories are easier to do than novels. They can take less time for sure, but that depends too, right? I have short stories that from start to finish, from draft one to finish draft, maybe I've taken like, a couple months, maybe a couple weeks. And then I have other stories like the one I did in undergrad where we're talking like 6-7 years, and then not consistent work, right? But like sometimes that incubation period is also so important for me. Like what's happening between those drafts, the distance that, how I'm developing as a writer between each draft. So I wouldn't say that it's easier, but I would say that if you're someone who's like, I can't finish a novel because novels are hard. I'm with you. It's taking a really long time. But maybe it's something that you can play with. You know what I mean? You can like write a messy draft of a short story. You can also write a messy draft of a novel, a messy draft of anything, honestly. But and usually they are messy and shitty and terrible, but like you keep working on them to make them less so. But I mean, yeah, I mean it could feel more manageable. I'll put it that way. Not easier, but maybe more manageable as someone who's like, I just want to finish something. Okay, take a story and see where you go.
Wonderful. Oh, Dante, could we beg just a teeny one more bit of your time, because I would love to get this
questions. Honestly, this is my favorite part of the whole thing. Like after the reading part is done, because I always get nervous. I'm like, I'm gonna mess up so bad, like during the reading part. But like the question part, I'm like, yay, this is just what I like to do, which is talk about
awesome. Let's do it, because I want to make sure everybody gets their questions asked. So this is from Clara. The class Clara's in recently read your story Exotics, and Clara just has to know, what was your thought? What were you thinking while you were writing that story, which indeed is eerie and certainly well written?
That was one of the stories where like, are they going to cancel me? Am I allowed to write this? That was definitely one of the things. I think so. The idea of it came up in my head. Like I just thought about like how much we have no access to the places the uber wealthy hang out, and like what are they doing, at any given time. And so that was kind of circulating in my head. And then the other thing that was circulating in my head is like the idea of like exotic meats. Have you ever gone to like a restaurant where it's like they serve like squirrel and alligator and that kind of stuff? So that was the other part of it. And then the third part of it came later, and this was like maybe a year or two after I had the first two ideas about exotic meats and that kind of and what the uber wealthy do. But I started thinking about like how this country cannibalizes youth, right? We always are kind of doing that. Like youth is either used to sell things or it's used as a scapegoat. And I think by the time people who are young are no longer young, or they first realize like, oh, I am going to age and die, they haven't really been prepared to live past their own youth, right? And it becomes hard to accept. And I think that's how we kind of get this weird dynamic of being embittered and angry at the generations that come after us, instead of realizing that the generations that come after us are literally us and our future path forward. I just think that that's something that was on my mind. And then so I'm kind of exploring that through every single story in the book. I think Exotics is a story where people don't talk about it, or they're like, I don't understand why that is in the collection. It's so weird. But it's like, it seems really surreal, but it's only feels that way because I'm doing very literally what I'm doing in every other story, which is examining systems of oppression that we live in and our complicity in them, right? We're all complicit in the systems of power just by virtue of existing in them and, having to make a living. So what does that look like? And so I just thought like, what if they were like literally eating babies? And then that's what happened.
It's a brilliant story, and I love how it works in the collection. All right, we're just one more.
I'm good.
Okay, and so from Kia, do you write your stories almost as a series, or were they all connected, or are they distinct and unrelated, or maybe do you see them as a whole?
Yeah, so I definitely think of this short story collection as a linked collection. I think if you get into marketing and that kind of thing, usually they only want to consider a collection linked when it's the same characters, but there's so many different things that constitute a link, right? There's language. There's certain words besides the words milk, blood, and heat, which do repeat throughout the story. And I think of those as totems. So each time you see that word, I'm hoping it picks up resonance. So by the time you get to the end of the book, it like all reverberates back to like mean something deeper than they do on their own. But you know, there's language and place and, you know, theme obviously that make a link. So I think of this whole collection as kind of echoes and mirrors, right? There's, you know, so there's the story Feast that I read, which is dealing with a miscarriage. And then there's another story called Necessary Bodies, where this woman is kind of trying to decide whether she should keep a pregnancy or not. And then the very first short story has like, you know, these two little girls making a blood pact in milk. And then in the very last story, this mother is offering her daughter milk. You know what I mean? So it's all kind of basically whatever questions I'm exploring, which is basically, is morality situational? Is it conditional? What do these words mean? I'm taking that same question and turning it at different angles to be looked at differently through the worlds of these characters each and every single time. So I do think of it as linked. I didn't know that it was a collection at first, though. You know, I was writing the stories and I was just like, you are so boring. You keep writing the same story. You're just like changing the names. Like, this is so obvious. And then I had a friend, thankfully, who kind of was like, they're not the same story, but they are interested in the same thing. And then I was kind of like, oh, wait, isn't that what collections do? And so I was like, maybe they belong together. And then I was able to, you know, for the rest of the stories that came, write more consciously towards what that connection was. But my brain was already kind of doing it.
I see. I love thinking about a collection as like a prism, or as facets turning to reflect the characters and their concerns. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dantil. And please stick around for one moment, everybody, while I make this particularly fitting announcement, I think. It's my honor right now to announce the undergraduate winner of the 2021 Dixeski Fiction Prize. This annual prize, established by ODU English alum Jerry Dixeski, awards $500 and public recognition at the Literary Festival to a graduate and an undergraduate writer of prose fiction in the English department. The 2021 competition has been judged by Brenda Peñato, author of the collection The Rock Eaters, out this year from Penguin Books. In the undergraduate category, the winner is Desiree Hensley for her story Island of Two Hills. Desiree will receive $500 and will be invited to read from her winning story at the English Department Awards ceremony in April. Congratulations. I'm super glad to be back here. Big digital and in real life round of applause. Wow. Thank you again, Dantil. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer, for the beautiful introduction. Thank you all for being here. And please join us again tomorrow for readings by Mansoura Daifi, Lynn Waltz, and Amanda Galvin-Wynn, Kareem Fahmy, and Meredith Talasan. For the full schedule, please see the ODU Literary Festival website. Thank you, and see you all next time.